Payroll is the basic of everything. And I think that as I go back and back and back into my history, I always said that I'm a dinosaur in this industry. So I have more than 20 years of experience currently in the payroll and global workforce mobility kind of industry. And for me, payroll is really the infrastructures. I mean, if you want to understand the world politics kind of dynamics between countries, go to their payroll system, you'll get it all. For us, when we were starting to build everything that is related to payroll, we were obviously very obsessed about the data and the completion of the data and discrepancies in the data and so on. But then we realized that, if I'm producing a great payslip and everything is correct and seamless experience, but you're not getting paid correctly and on time, so it means nothing. And when we started the journey of payments, we were trying to collaborate with a leading payment platform, which are actually quite good in sending funds cross-border transactions. But for them, they are not giving attention to the land date of the funds. And in payroll, this is all about the land data.
Hello and welcome back to the Payroll Podcast. I'm your host. My name is Nick Day. I'm the CEO at JGA Recruitment Group. We're specialist payroll recruiters with offices now in the UK, Europe, and the USA as well. And today we have a truly special guest joining us on the show, someone who's been recognized by Fortune as one of the most powerful women in tech. Yes, today we're going to be diving into one of the most critical and often overlooked aspects of global payroll, and that's payments, often considered by others as the last mile of compliant payroll. So today I've got joining me Eynat Guez, a trailblazer in global payroll, a workforce management, and of course the co-founder and CEO of Papaya Global, a leading SaaS platform valued at over 3.7 billion. Now, Eynat is transforming the way enterprise companies manage global payroll. And she's doing that using cutting-edge technologies to streamline payments and compliance. Recognized as well by FinTech magazine as a top 10 founding CEO, Eynat is driving innovation at the intersection of payroll, pensions, and technology. So in today's episode, we're going to be exploring exactly why payments are the critical last mile of payroll, the unique challenges of payroll and payments, and of course, the importance of integrating payroll and payments to really help reduce fraud-based risk. So if you're passionate about payroll, if you want to know more about payments, this is going to be a really good episode for you. But most importantly, we've got a really influential leader today in the payroll space. So really do stay tuned for what I'm sure is going to be an incredible episode full of incredible insights. So without further ado, Eynat, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. Thanks a lot for the great introduction.
I'm super excited. I'm going to start with one question, a question I ask all of my guests, which is this. What does the word payroll mean to you?
It's a good question because for me, payroll is the basic of everything. And I think that as I go back and back and back into my history, I always said that I'm a dinosaur in this industry. So I have more than 20 years of experience currently in the payroll and global workforce mobility kind of industry. And for me, payroll is really the infrastructures. I mean, if you want to understand the world politics kind of dynamics between countries, go to their payroll system, you'll get it all.
Fantastic. Well, a great place to start. And today we're going to be talking, of course, about payments. I mentioned in the introduction, it's often known as the last sort of critical mile of payroll. Tell us a little bit about your experience and why payments is something we really do need to consider in the world of payroll.
Yeah. So, the funny thing about payroll payment is that we call it a super payment because when you're just sending funds, and if both of us are currently in the UK or in the US and you need to send $10 to me, it's very easy. You probably have like 3, 4, 5 different methods that you can choose in order to process this transaction. If I'm outside of your geo, so let's say you're in the UK and now I'm outside in other location in the US, it's becoming much more complicated. Time is becoming longer, and obviously it's becoming much more expensive. And as you are going further and further to other region, it's obviously becoming more and more complicated. Now, for us, when we were starting to build everything that is related to payroll, we were obviously very obsessed about the data and the completion of the data and discrepancies in the data and so on. But then we realized that, if I'm producing a great payslip and everything is correct and seamless experience, but you're not getting paid correctly and on time, so it means nothing. And when we started the journey of payments, we were trying to collaborate with a leading payment platform, which are actually quite good in sending funds cross-border transactions. But for them, they are not giving attention to the land date of the funds. And in payroll, this is all about the land date. I need actually to go backwards, and I need to assure that I'm looking on all of the obstacles along the way in order to assure that if you need to be paid on a specific date of the month, no matter what's going to happen along the way and how many obstacles I'm going to have, like it can be compliance, it can be some kind of other kind of restrictions, it can be even holidays along the way with the corresponding banks, you'll be paid correctly and on time. No one's going to deduct 10, 15, $20 from your pay as kind of correspondence banking fees. No one is going to stop this because your bank just have answers why I need to pay you a few thousands of dollars from overseas. And nobody is going to challenge this along the way because maybe your name is just similar currently to a name that is on the sanction list, which happens on a daily basis, honestly. And those are the things when we started payment and payroll payments, we wanted to assure that we are putting this at the center of our attention. Just to add another piece to that, when we're looking on payroll payments, this is not only the payment that you're going to get as an employee, it's also your pension funds, it's the authority payments, it's your social security funds. And those are very, very, very local transactions. And obviously, I mean, they know how to work amazingly well when your bank is in the country that you're getting paid. And none of the people in the government or in those kind of institution ever thought about supporting international kind of use cases because this is obviously not something that is in the top of mind. And for us, kind of supporting everything that is related to payroll and to payment that are related to payroll, this is really kind of the whole world that we build around payroll.
That makes sense. I mean, there's a lot to take in. You've got pension, social security, payroll, of course, all things that are hugely important to the employee side. We talk about payroll being really all about the employee experience now. So what are some of the ramifications or even the risks that companies face if payroll payments are delayed or even mishandled?
So, risks are coming from different kind of aspects and angles. Okay, let's start from the risk that no one likes to talk about, which are fraud, and these are kind of mistakes that can
Yeah.
happen due to fraud or just kind of human kind of errors. Okay, if I'm sending payments to the wrong banks, just the amount of time that it will take me to retrieve them back from the bank that received them will be very, very substantial. Obviously, I cannot tell you that your payment is going to be delayed because I've made a mistake as a company. And I mean, even if we're going kind of farther the road, we do see um, quite a lot of incidents that are involved fraud or eventually kind of intent. Both on sometimes payroll agencies, providers, individuals in the organizations that eventually are shifting and sending funds to the wrong accounts by intent and by purpose because it's very manual. So obviously kind of safeguarding and securing the whole flow, assuring that you have a full way to assure and you monitor that funds get to the right place. This is one thing. And the other thing is eventually, even if we will take an event that I think that all of us on the payroll industry remember because it actually happened a day before the pay date. The Silicon Valley Bank kind of a sudden closure happened on Thursday evening, and it was Friday or Monday that people needed to get paid in the US, and people didn't know if the funds are going to be sent to their workers or not. Now, no one cares, not your bank as an individual, if you need to pay your mortgage, or not the authorities, or no one cares that you had good intention to send the funds, but the banks that you used collapsed all of a sudden. You need to meet your contractual obligation. You need to pay payments on time. So obviously, I mean, you have a breach of the first and foremost, I would say, obligation that you have to your employees to pay them. Obviously, good, nice offices, kind of great benefits. Nothing is going to compensate anything, not on the personal kind of feeling, but definitely not on the contractual obligation if you did not pay someone on time. So those risks are coming from both sides. I think that organizations are spending enormous amount of funds and processing time in order to assure that they are safeguarding processes, they are safeguarding emails, they are safeguarding data. Eventually, the funds, the biggest expense of the company, is normally very, very manual, is normally kind of being done with very minimum kind of approval chains and so on, and this is a major risk to the business.
No, that makes sense. So essentially, that I guess a payroll payment is different from other types of payments, right? Before those reasons, as you say, they're not interested about what the individual has to pay a mortgage, but for the individual's perspective, it's absolutely critical. We go into survival mode. So, with that in mind, because they are different to other payments, are there any kind of specific compliant challenges that often get overlooked by businesses when they're dealing with things like payroll payments?
Yes, I think that we eventually, I mean, I think that always the challenge with global payroll is that when things are local to local, we all know how to do things. It's much easier. When you are kind of crossing the line to the global space, this is where things are becoming much more complicated. Definitely on the payroll side, I know that you spend quite a lot of time in your kind of podcast speaking about that. But on payments, it's even becoming more complicated because if I'm sending funds from overseas to your account, I mean, your bank probably will not be able to reconcile them as salary payments. It means that eventually, when you're going to go and ask for a mortgage, you won't have a credit history because, from your banking standpoint, you don't get salary. Okay, in countries like Australia, your life insurance is actually being determined by the salary kind of amount that you get on a monthly basis. So salary transaction is a very important transaction, also from the local side and how it's being reconciled by the bank. And I'll go back to the authorities because I think that it's worth understanding. If I sent a payment on your behalf, let's say to your social security institution in Spain, and they couldn't recognize the employer because they don't know how to eventually get this as they don't know how to create the reference code correctly and so on, and 3 months later you're going to go and claim for social security, uninsurance, unemployment kind of funding and so on. They will tell you that you are not covered because your employer did not pay your contributions, which is obviously not correct. So we see many cases where we realize that companies actually thought that they are compliant. They send funds from overseas to different entities. And I mean, they are lending there somewhere on a transfer account. No one is touching them. But in reality, on the same time, they're actually impacting employees and their rights.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. I mean, sometimes you don't consider some of these aspects when you talk about a global payroll. If you're not used to it, the Australian example you gave is a really good example of how we need to be mindful of the contextualities of different, the intricacies of different global payrolls, right? So, with that in mind, what types of payments then are included at the moment in workforce payments? I'm assuming they do differ globally, and if they do, how are sort of companies making those payments today? Are there more than one way? Because in the UK, we're very familiar with the BACS process, but of course, that time difference is going to presumably have a huge potential currency change and things like that, so fluctuation. So there must be a lot to consider when you're managing that on a global scale.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, eventually, we tend to think that we live in a global world, but we live in a local world with quite a lot of countries that are just nearby each other, but each one of them
Nice,
is kind of
I like that.
keeping their own rails, right? I mean,
Yeah.
BACS is very UK based, SEPA is very European based. There are lots of kind of protocols that are very kind of regional basis, and they know how to collaborate quite well within their ecosystem and so on. And what we see is first that currently companies, in order to overcome those challenges, in many cases, they send the payroll funds to a third party, accounting firms, someone on their behalf, and ask them in a way to do them a favor and to pay on their behalf. Obviously, I mean, I think that payroll is the sort of business that needs to be on a trust no one mode because you need to assure that things happen as the way that needs to happen, that you don't want to trust anyone along the way that will make it happen. So this is definitely things that we see, and obviously, I mean, we are replacing or we are advising to replace because you don't want those things to fail. And I think that I just had a very interesting conversation with one of the a payroll manager on one of the biopharmaceutical Fortune 500 organization. And he told me that for him, the most amazing thing is always the understanding that regardless the size of the organization, you are always relying on 2 to 3 people to process payroll and payments. And eventually having a business continuity plan, this is very important on the payroll side, but when it's come to payment is even more important because if you don't have an access to the bank account, if you don't have an access to process funds, I mean, the worst case scenario, and I think we saw it during COVID, maybe I will not pay 100% your payslip correctly because currently we are in a crisis and nobody can process payroll. But it doesn't mean that I don't need to pay you. So eventually I need to assure that I send funds your way. So generally speaking, the way that we are looking on this in Papaya is really building a network of payments locally. So we really went country per country, build these local rails of payment, assuring that we can replace local rails for companies. So we are not sending kind of transactions from overseas and just assuring that they're happening, but we are really kind of replacing local rails, assuring that we can act locally in every country, so we can really be your local kind of banking partner and assure that, as we said, net payments, authority payments, everything that is related to the workforce payments is being processed correctly.
It makes sense. And actually, you highlight an interesting point, and probably not one that I've talked about on the show or thought about before. But when you talk about payments, particularly on an in-house payroll operation, often there's a single point of failure for almost over potentially over 1,000 employees. If something was to happen to that payroll professional and you haven't got the due diligence in place or the documents and policies and processes in place, actually, so something happens to that payroll professional, you're putting the risk of non-payment or delayed payment to your entire workforce. And yeah, as you say, a lot of time companies don't really think about it that way around. They just think we've got a payroll person here, they've got their job to do. As long as it's right, accurate, compliant, and on time, we're not really that fussed until it goes wrong. And you
Yeah.
highlighted a couple of points there. We talked about when the Silicon Valley Bank went down, or COVID and different things. Actually, things do happen that really do need a sort of a level of contingency to help mitigate that risk. Now, I know at Papaya Global, you're quite heavily involved in obviously technology business as well. So you're ahead of the curve in technology. You're utilizing automation. What are some of the things that you're doing at Papaya Global that are helping to mitigate some of that risk, and maybe some of the smart ways you're really starting to involve things like advancements in technology and automation?
Yeah, so I think that you mentioned some of the risk, but it's worth kind of highlighting them. First, I think that we need to understand that we want to assure that we are not relying on people and doing manual work. We are not relying on banks that are not tier one or that we can not 100% rely on them that will be there tomorrow morning. This is why, for example, I mean, in Papaya, we only use tier one banks, partners as JP Morgan and Citi on our global operation. Because honestly, I know that if I tell you that we are going to use JP Morgan rails and your wallets, your client money account sits on JP Morgan, you trust them probably more than you trust Papaya or any other kind of fintech company around there. And this is great. And obviously, this is the right approach. And you're also obviously kind of protected by the regulator and so on. So you're also insured and have all of the measurement in place. So the way that we are looking on that is eventually kind of first assuring that you can connect the payroll data to the payment, I mean, automatically. Okay, assuring that we have fraud detections in place to assure that there is no manual fraud. I'll give you some alerts that can happen. If we see that many banks' account of employees has changed, I mean, all of a sudden, that will raise an alert, okay? Because, I mean, we always in this business of eventually anomaly detection and understanding, I mean, patterns and so on. So if in a normal payroll cycle, 10% maybe of the employees will change their bank account, and all of a sudden I have 50% that are changing their bank accounts, I might be facing here a fraud event, and I want to assure that somebody is raising the flag before somebody is signing these transactions and sending funds to the wrong bank accounts. Same, for example, and those are very common payroll mistakes that nobody likes to speak about them. If you have a huge discrepancies in your payroll month over month, so all of a sudden, if you got paid $10,000 this month, but next month, all of a sudden, you're getting paid $100,000, maybe you did a phenomenal job. I would say that probably you have a mistake that we need to dive in and assure that somebody is eventually kind of approving it and assuring that this is the right transaction. And same as having like a contingency plan in place and assuring that if I'm not available and I'm the kind of the first assignee of the organization that can release transactions, there is another person and a third person that can eventually log in that have very, very specific permission. It can be to a specific cycle, specific amount, specific group of people, but eventually there is a contingency plan in place. And I think that regardless of Papaya or anything that we are doing, having a contingency plan in place on payroll and payment, this is one of the most critical aspects that companies need to develop. I think every company have a contingent plan in place for their IT operation. But if you cannot log into your email for a day, you have currently quite a lot of alternatives, right? You have like SMS, WhatsApps, phones, and so on.
Yeah.
If you cannot pay your people, I mean, you need to have a second kind of plan in place.
Hello, global payroll leaders. Are you facing challenges in finding the right payroll talent for your team? If you are, I hear you. And I'm here to offer you a solution. Because at JGA Payroll Recruitment, we're experts at sourcing, attracting, and engaging with top tier global payroll talent that really drives business success. So don't let the frustration of finding great payroll professionals hold you back from raising the profile of payroll in your organization. The cost of a poor hire isn't just financial, it costs you time, or worse, it damages the reputation of your payroll operation. That's why we're 100% dedicated to ensuring your recruitment journey with us is nothing short of exceptional. Partner with us at JGA because we're an award winning global payroll recruitment agency with a proven track record of success. We have over 100 five-star Google reviews and we're trusted by many of the world's leading brands. And we would just love to help you elevate your team with the best payroll talent available anywhere in the world. Reach out to us today at 01727 800 or 377 or visit us at jjrecruitment.com. And while you're at it, why not sign up to our weekly payroll newsletter for exclusive industry insights and job opportunities? With us, your perfect payroll opportunity or your perfect payroll hire awaits. Yeah, it's really good advice. And as you say, we often don't need it until we need it. And that's the thing. It's
That's
good to get
correct. And
ahead
then
and to
it's too
prepare
late.
for it. Yeah. But just you talked about some of the benefits, and they make total sense to me that the insurances, the fact it's regulated, of using a tier one bank, perfect. What are some of the risks though of those that aren't using? I don't know if it's a common thing, but if you know, I understand the benefits of tier one, but what are the risks of not working with a high tiered bank? I mean, I've seen some news today about some of the new banks where people have had issues, for example, where fraud has happened and they haven't been able to get that money back because they're not necessarily considered, I won't name names here, but actually a bank yet. So they haven't got that government guarantee here in the UK. And it suddenly occurred to me that, oh, maybe I need to move some of my own banking operations to somewhere I've got a little bit more security. I'm talking
so
obviously as a personal consumer, but what are the risks of a non-higher tier
so
bank?
Uh, I would say that, I mean, fintech is a great industry and there is no industry that is risk kind of free, right?
Sure.
But I think, I mean, let's put fraud aside. I think that the majority, okay, 99% of the fintech companies are not there in order to fraud their clients. And obviously, I mean, they have the securities in place. The problem is that the way that the fintech works is that we develop technology on top of banking rails, okay? If all of a sudden the banking rails that you're using, and again, Silicon Valley Bank is a great example, but if we are looking on the US in the last few months, there were quite a lot of banks that needed to shut down or to eventually kind of close the business of their clients, their fintech companies, because the regulator came and asked them, questioned them about KYC compliances and so on. This is where you all of a sudden can get hurt. So maybe I'm less concerned. I'm less looking on kind of the edge cases of fraud. I'm just saying that if somebody is telling you, listen, tomorrow morning I'm shutting down your account. Sorry about that. Just find another solution. Bank solution is not a solution that you can do overnight.
So, one question I do have is why is it important that providers have their own money transfer licenses for payroll payments? Because this was something that's relatively new to me, not something that I'd really come across until I started researching it. So, because I wasn't aware, I'm sure our listeners might not be familiar as well. I wonder if you could just, bring us up to speed.
Yeah, so it's a great question because you understand this is the boring part of the business that sometimes you don't ask until, as you said, that you have issues and then you
Yeah.
realize that you don't really know. So, generally speaking, money transfer license is eventually the company that is actually being regulated. Okay, so if Papaya owns the money transfer license around the globe, it means that we need to provide and we are regulated and supervised by the regulator. So it means generally that if something happens, if we have any kind of issues with clients' money, I mean, regulators, since we are obviously kind of regulated, is stepping in and it's actually insured and have everything by depends on the country and so on. But the client is a worry less when you're working. And what happens on the fintech industry in many cases is that you are actually getting services from someone that is not under money transfer license, and you don't know what's happening on the back end. Okay, maybe everything is doing great, but maybe one day, or like all of a sudden, you get a notice that they need to shut down the business, that the regulators shut down their business. You don't know their compliance practice. Now, the most important thing here to understand is that KYC is a long process. Okay, if I currently lost the ability or don't have banking rails or payment rails, even if I'm going to knock on doors and other kind of companies would like to onboard me, or other banks would like to onboard me very, very quickly, compliance currently and KYC process, financial KYC process, can take any time between 3 days to 3 months. Um, and sometimes more. So eventually it can impact the operation of the business. So, as anything else, I mean, this is the most important thing. I mean, it's almost like eventually kind of buying insurance from a non-insurance company. So you're buying from someone that is utilizing some insurance company behind the scenes. If you don't know who owns the license, if you don't know what's their compliance practice, if you don't know how they handle and mitigate kind of risk, how they what's the regulator thinks about them, it's eventually you're almost buying kind of a sticker kind of company. But generally speaking, they have zero control, they have zero ability to take a liability on anything that happens to your funds along the way. And I think this is the most important thing for us. We literally, because unfortunately, and I would say that I think that payroll needs to be a regulated industry, but it's
I
still not
agree. I
there.
agree.
But we literally chose to be regulated, and we chose to kind of wear the hat of a financial regulated institution, because we believe first that it's bring better practice for the clients. But the only way that I can own the last mile of compliance, as you define it very, very nicely, and assure that I can guarantee the landing date, that I can guarantee that I have full liability to your funds and everything that I'm doing, is if I eventually own the money transfer license, and if I'm the one reporting directly to the regulator and assuring that I meet everything, all of the compliance. And very similar to payroll payments is, I mean, constantly kind of changing or adding compliance around the world.
So it's obviously it's imperative, as you say, it's such an important area for people that we do have those safeguards. And I guess that's the thing that just it's so important that we consider some of these things. It's so easy just to find a supplier or think it's such a simple solution until something goes wrong. But how easy is it to integrate payroll and payments? Because often, certainly on this show, we just talk about the payroll element of it, and we don't often talk about that integration piece. So are there some challenges that we need to consider, or things we need to just have a think about before we sort of jump in?
So I think we spend a lot of time to assure that we are making it very easy, and that we are actually creating an integration that is seamless, exactly as we wanted to assure that we can eventually bring payroll data from human capital management to other kind of systems very, very easy to the payroll. So I think that eventually, I mean, for us, this is a key thing. I mean, connecting payroll and payments seamlessly, assuring that you don't break the data, that we are reading everything, that you are eventually kind of working on the same format. Because I think this is one of the things that really creates a lot of manual errors today. That if I'm going to the bank with a payroll file, they said, I don't know this file, please fill in all of the information in my format in the bank kind of website and so on, and I'll do the transfers. And then first it's becoming very manual, very, very long process. But also, obviously, I mean, this is error prone. And this is something that we want to assure that we are completely kind of removing and reducing. So assuring that you can create a data environment, generally speaking, I think in payroll, not only in payroll to payments, but the whole flow, assuring that the data kind of friction that you have and the flexibility to adapt the data is as simple as it can be. This is a key, I think, for every successful payroll operation, definitely for payroll and payment, but also for a global kind of payroll operation.
And are there any sort of unique challenges that I guess are not being addressed by some of the more current solutions in the market? And if there are there any sort of innovations that Papaya Global are implementing that really address some of those gaps and actually really improve the workforce payment sort of experience?
So I think there are lots of great fintech companies in the market, but I think in payment, I mean, everybody wear specific kind of hat and specific kind of mission and vision that they are solving. For us, it was always workers payment. As I said, I mean, how do I assure that I can guarantee the landing date? How can I assure that we can take payroll data, everything that you bring me from the payroll system, and eventually kind of implement it directly to the payment system? And how can I assure that I'm doing everything pre-screening and pre-payment in order to assure that I'm not solving things after they have challenges, but before even they get into escalation and so on, and you're not getting paid on time. So, from the best of my knowledge, Papaya is the only one currently that first is acting as a payment company that can also process payroll, but moreover, that is really kind of taking the workforce payment as their mission statement and solving everything around that. So we don't know how to transfer uh, funds, small transactions on wallets. We don't know how to process payments if you want to pay to a taxi and so on, or to the endpoints. This is not us. We know how to do corporate payments and workforce payments. This is what we do, and this is what we eventually live on a daily basis. And very, very similar to payroll, it's not a one-time effort. It's a constantly changing efforts because regulation change. I mean, if I'll take the sanction, like the Russian sanctions, this has a huge impact on paying people. Not
Yeah.
only if you want to pay people in Russia, but I mean, people that are connected, and those databases are updated on a daily basis. And honestly, there are so many peoples with similar names around the world that can be impacted even without knowing this, that you constantly need to assure that you are working very, very, very closely to the regulation, to the compliance, to the sanctions, and assuring that you always kind of catching up, because we cannot be ahead of them. I don't know what they're gonna kind of decide tomorrow morning, but I can assure that eventually we're working very, very closely to them.
Yeah, I mean, you really highlight the importance of, well, payroll and payments is critical, right? It's a critical part of the process. We need to consider safeguards. We need to make sure we're identifying fraud, that we're mitigating our risk. And it's really important that businesses have a continuity plan for payroll payments. Are there any sort of tips or practical advice you'd give to people that perhaps they're starting this journey? They haven't started that continuity plan process yet, but there are some key things they need to consider. What would they be?
Listen to a podcast that speak about payroll, and I think that eventually I think learning, honestly, I mean, kind of trying to understand what people is doing in this industry is very, very valuable. When I started my journey, it was very clear to me that knowledge and learning from other people experience is very important in order to understand what I can do and how I do things. And I think today there is a lot of knowledge out there. I mean, there are great podcasts, great groups, great kind of initiative to learn, and just always be in a mindset that you don't know what you don't know, because every single country in the world has their own kind of nuance and things and so on. And if you think that you understand something and you have great control, it means that you're not in the right direction. So be very receptive, ask a lot of questions, assure that you understand the whole flow. I think generally speaking, payroll and payments, it's an industry that if you are not a detailed person and if you don't like to go to the bits and bytes of things, this is not the industry for you. But it's really kind of building it from the infrastructures and assuring that you always can be very, very flexible with the solution, because it's an ever changing kind of environment.
No, fantastic. I couldn't agree more. So I guess it leads into the last question, which is tell us a little bit about Papaya Global, because I know we've talked a lot today about payments and the importance of considering your payments provider, the importance of, well, lots of things, a lot of consideration pieces here. If someone was looking, or maybe they've got a global payroll, maybe they want to find out a little bit more about the services you provide, and tell us a little bit more about Papaya.
Yeah, so always happy to do so. So Papaya is a global workforce platform providing employment, payroll, and payment solutions for multinational organizations. We are operating in 160 countries, obviously kind of supporting payroll, employment, and payment in all of those countries. But we co-founded Papaya 7 years ago with the mindset to really kind of transform this industry to be one platform to support global workforce. I think I'm very proud of it, of this industry. When I started, I mean, it was zero tech, very, very small kind of industry. Now it's becoming a real industry and it's becoming a real problem. And I think that obviously it's great to see. Us ourselves, we're about 1,000 people across the globe. So we have about 10 offices across the globe, growing very quickly, as you said, serving mid-market to enterprise clients, to Fortune clients. And generally speaking, we are very passionate and we love payroll. We love to solve complicated problems.
Fantastic. Well, actually, truth be told, Papaya Global was the first time I ever saw a payroll company in that fast track, the top, some of the fastest growing companies in the world, and payroll's never been represented. And I saw Papaya Global in that list, and it was like, great, finally, we're really starting to raise the profile of payroll. It's starting to be taken seriously by organizations that do have a focus on tech, do have a focus on on compliance, a focus on customer service, employee experience, and all of these things. So, congratulations on an incredible growth story for sure. And it's, it's a real testament to the service and actually the disruption in a positive way that Papaya has been able to have on the industry in raising that profile. So I think it's really exciting. Yeah. Well, let's open the payroll vault. So these are short, sharp questions for you. Eynat, the first is, one piece of advice you would give to someone working in payroll right now.
Wow. Digitalize everything around you as much as you can and automate and use AI. AI is an amazing, eventually technology that can impact payroll substantially.
Fantastic. Actually, one question is, it's not in my vault, but I'm going to ask it because it makes sense to ask it while you've mentioned that. What do you think will be the most significant shift in payroll over the next 5 years? Do you see that shift being AI, or do you think it being something else?
I think AI and compliance is like, the most amazing kind of combination that I think that can happen. We are just obviously starting, and we are all kind of following the Trendermos kind of growth of AI and the use case for the businesses. So I think it's going to be a major shift. And I think it's going to be a great shift. So you'll still need payroll experts because we do need their expertise, but they will become a real expert.
Absolutely right. And of course, we still need that human touch. And I guess the one thing we haven't asked yet is talking about currency conversions and payments. Do you see technology like blockchain starting to infiltrate the payroll process a little bit more? I know it's difficult because of the energy consumptions, the cost and the adoption and things like that. But because it's able to make transactions faster and sort of almost not need some of that third party response in terms of the currency fluctuation piece, do you see that kind of technology starting to come into the space?
Yeah, so blockchain is in the infrastructure, so it's eventually making our life easier. I mean, obviously, secure technology and so on, and it will take more time because it requires a lot of changes on kind of a very traditional kind of banking industry. Digital currencies, crypto, eventually kind of assuring that we all kind of transition to get paid in digital currencies. Definitely, we see this already, and we see kind of a huge kind of growth in specific markets. I think fluctuations in currencies and so on, and I mean, once digital currencies are becoming a tool that you can also pay micropayments. So I can really kind of go to the grocery shop and kind of pay with digital currencies and so on. This is where it's becoming kind of an enabler. And I think that the market will align. I mean, generally speaking, almost every country currently have a digital currency project. So all of the currencies, I don't think that my kids will know in like 20 years what a bill is and what a coin is, because
Sure.
that's not going to be their word.
Or a monthly pay cycle for that matter. It's going to be very different. You mentioned micropayments. It's kind of perfect for those gig economy workers, those fractional workers, and the kind of the way the marketplace is shifting. So question number 2, if you had the power of foresight and you could change the entire payroll industry with one action or one improvement, what would that action or improvement be?
Wow. I think that I would start from encouraging government to just change the way that they are designing payroll on their end and to just create a huge database. I think that a lot of our problems are being created by the fact that we need to fulfill compliance and regulation that are not digitalized by the government side. So I think I had a blog about it recently saying that every government needs to have a chief technology and chief AI officer, and then they need to transform payroll.
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, we've had a similar answer to that before in terms of ministerial governance here in the UK, but obviously it needs to have oversight on a broader, more global scale. And last but not least, a little bit of fun. If payroll was a song or a movie, you can pick, what song or movie would it be and why?
Wow, E.T. Why?
E.T.,
I don't know. because it's always an alien in the organization, but when it's missing, everyone is looking for it, right? So it's kind of those things that when it's seamless and everything goes well, nobody thinks even it's a huge problem or disruption. But when it's not going well, this is where everyone is looking for this ET and what happened here and so on. So yeah, probably.
They all want to call home, or they want to call their payroll department when it goes wrong. So I can understand the connection there as well, for sure. All right, that's been an absolute pleasure having on the Payroll Podcast. I thank you for enlightening our listeners into the world of payments, the importance of payments, and actually why it's probably, as you say, it's the last sort of mile of compliance, but we don't consider it enough. For those that want to find out more, there will be links in our show notes, but I wonder if you could share some links or places that perhaps our listeners may want to visit.
Perfect. I mean, I will first, thanks for having us. It is great. I mean, we have a great payroll and payment academy on our website. So, I mean, papayaglobal.com. And I think that we are always kind of, we all love to contribute knowledge as well. So I encourage everyone to start their kind of journey there as well.
Fantastic. And for those who do want to find out more, the link will be in our show notes. So you can click straight through to the show notes of today's episode and go straight through to Papaya Global to find out more. There'll be a link as well to my LinkedIn page and Eynat's as well for those who want to contact or find out more. And to our listeners, if you want to find out more as well about anything to do with the Payroll Podcast, this is the place to be. So do remember to subscribe to the show. Do remember to share it with all of your colleagues and friends, because if we share the message, we can really raise the profile of payroll globally. We can find out about the important changes in the profession, such as those that are impacting the payments industry, AI that we've just discussed, blockchain, and more. There's so many things happening in this wonderful world of payroll that this is the place where you can really listen to the industry leaders like Eynat has shared her expertise with us today. It's the place to be. So please do remember to press that subscribe button and share it with your colleagues. And as always, if you're a payroll professional looking for expert recruitment support, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly at nick@jgarecruitment.com, or you can also find our website in the show notes as well. Just need to say one more huge thank you to Eynat Guez for joining me today. Thank you for you, our listeners, for tuning in. I look forward to bringing you the next impactful episode of the Payroll Podcast very soon. Eynat, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.